Let's talk about Street Fighter. I've loved this series ever since I was a little kid, and its combination of strategic mind games and anime shenanigans has always kept me coming back. Street Fighter V is going strong, and Street Fighter VI was announced a few months ago, which is awesome. A brand new entry in a long-running fighting game franchise is all but guaranteed, right? I mean, we eventually got a new Soul Calibur, Killer Instinct, and Samurai Showdown, so of course Street Fighter would continue. However, it wasn't always like this, as Capcom was seriously questioning the future of the series back in the early 2000s after the release of 1997's Street Fighter III, a game that sold horribly and had no stable player base aside from the truly hardcore fighting game fans. And even then, that was only around the time that Third Strike came out in 1999. The fighting game franchise was slowly but surely declining in popularity with both casual and die-hard audiences alike. But then one day, in October of 2007, this happened. That's right, Street Fighter was back in all of its glory, ready to be played like never before. Brand new features like focus attacks and ultra combos made their way into the game, along with returning sights like a completely... This is a completely broken cigar.
4, and I guess you just 5, 6, 7, 8. I lost count. And there we go. And there we go.
Once Street Fighter IV was released at home, it sold over 3 million copies and became one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time on Metacritic, causing a boom in the fighting game scene's popularity, and bringing lots of new players who still play competitive fighting games to this very day into the scene. While everyone loves Street Fighter IV in the modern era, the original arcade release is often forgotten, mainly because the home console version came out less than a year after the original version. I decided to fire up the arcade version of Street Fighter IV that was widely released to the world, to compare it to not just the console versions, but also to the pre-release prototype versions. Let's find out the nuances specific to 2008's arcade release of Street Fighter IV.
Street Fighter IV.
First off, just a minor grievance I wanted to mention. Upon booting into the game for the first time, none of my buttons worked, even though my emulator detects my inputs just fine. So, after putting on my hazmat suit, I decided to dive into the arcade test menu to solve the problem, which segues nicely into my current point, the test menu. I know this seems irrelevant, but I haven't seen or heard of anyone going over this game's test menu, so I thought I'd highlight it. There are a bunch of different options for you to choose, from a screen test, game options, online options, etc. You can mess around with different settings to change the difficulty, the number of rounds, damage, language. Hell, you can even input secret passwords to gain access to certain content that is otherwise locked away. Thankfully, GameFAQs holds these passcodes on their Street Fighter IV forum, so I was able to punch them in with no problem, unlocking Akuma. With that out of the way, let's jump into the main course of it all. Okay, I know what you're thinking, and I get it, I can't read Japanese either, but with the power of bad video editing, I can do this. There we go, much better. As you can see, there are 3 modes in the game. First off, we have Arcade Mode, which is 8 stages long against various AI opponents. Beginner Mode, which is the exact same thing except for real life opponents not being able to challenge you until you make it halfway through Arcade Mode. And Trial Mode, which is essentially a time trial mode. Since the first 2 modes are pretty much the same, the one that stuck out to me was Trial Mode, so I fired it up, picked Ryu, and then... Oh. Well, that sucks. Let's try again. Okay, I beat Crimson Viper with a perfect, and then I go on to... So I couldn't actually beat this mode due to this error that kept popping up, so all you need to know is that this mode is nearly identical to the time trial mode found in the home console version. Moving on to arcade mode was my next step, and I didn't get that error in this mode, which surprised me. I picked Ken and went through 8 rounds with a final boss against Seth. I didn't get Akuma as the secret final boss, so I just got this ending cutscene with no voice acting.
Thank you for playing.
Kinda strange.
Presented by Capcom.
Other than that, there's the standard 2-player versus mode which I couldn't test out, but you know how that goes. Player 1 fights player 2 and the winner stays on the machine. Simple. Now that that's out of the way, let's move on to some of the differences found in the pre-release prototype builds and the home console version. Let's begin with the differences between the home console versions, since that's what we're all familiar with. I'm going to be covering the most minuscule of details no matter how irrelevant they may seem, because I think they're fascinating in their own way. To start, the Versus logo on the loading screen gets larger, but it stays the same in the home console version. Some character portraits also look different, such as Blanka. And Seth is a lot larger in the loading screen than on the home console version. The character select screen is also different with less characters, being presented with a Dutch angle tilt. There are no character intros in arcade mode, it simply takes you to the loading screen for the first fight. The character endings are completely different as well. The home console versions look like an anime with full voice acting, whereas this is just slides on a screen with Japanese subtitles even when the language is set to English. The rival fight sound effect is different too. Take a listen.
Now fight your rival. Now fight your rival.
One thing I noticed before the game crashed in trial mode is that the time increase animation is different to how it looks in the console versions. You get 10 seconds no matter how well you do in the arcade, but the home version gives you various bonuses depending on your performance during the round. Now let's move on to the juicy stuff, the pre-release builds. From what these pictures of the game's alpha state tell you, the game was originally meant to look like something along the lines of the King of Fighters 12, what with the 2D drawn look. After this, Capcom experimented with 3D character models in a hangar stage with a kinda odd art style. I'm glad that the final game looks much better than this. Here's a screenshot of Dalsim and Blanka with the same HUD, but in the final training stage, which suggests that this stage was finished early on in development. Their poses look nearly identical to how they stand in the final game. When the game was finally ready to be revealed, Capcom took a beta build of the game to GDC 2008 to let members of the press try it out. I've zoomed the footage in to make the low quality gameplay easier to see, so you're welcome. You can tell that Ryu and Ken's faces are different along with the HUD, which looks drastically different when compared to the final game. The round 1 and fight fonts and positioning are also unlike the final version. One strange thing I noticed that may seem irrelevant to you is that when Ryu gets hit out of the air by Ken, he just falls to the ground. Physics like that aren't really present in the final version unless your opponent specifically hits you with a move that places you into a hard knockdown state. In the final game, Ryu would have gotten hit and then flipped out of the attack while still in the air. This suggests that the game's overall physics and movement systems were altered at some point early on in development. Ryu's character portrait is different here, along with Crimson Viper's face. Her eye color is different and her eyeshadow makes her look kind of fatigued. Abel has stripes on his arms, which were moved down to his legs in the final game. Here's some concept art that shows this old design. And while we're speaking of Abel, here's what he and Chun-Li originally looked like in the old loading screen. While this isn't really a change, I still thought this picture was interesting for 2 reasons. DJ and T-Hawk. These guys are fascinating because they never made it into Street Fighter 4. Super Street Fighter 4 had them, sure, but not the original version. Here's audio files of the announcer reading out their names that was leaked from the PC release.
DJ wins. Thunderhawk wins.
While gamers around the world loved Street Fighter 4 when it hit the home consoles, the original reception wasn't too hot. According to an article by Event Hubs detailing Street Fighter 4's lifespan, most Street Fighter fans thought that Street Fighter 4 was too slow and too similar to the older games, claiming it was boring and that there was no reason for them to play this game over Super Turbo or Third Strike. The community warmed up to it after the home releases of Vanilla Street Fighter 4 and Super Street Fighter 4, which contained more content and better online play. I made this video to highlight some of the differences found in the very first release of Street Fighter 4, and to hopefully remind some of you that they exist. From the secret characters to the wildly different ending movies, Arcade Street Fighter 4 has lots of interesting quirks that hold a special place in my heart as a fighting game fan. I used to play this game all the time in the arcades as a little kid, so it was very nostalgic to play the game again and take a trip down Street Fighter memory lane. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.